Today in the EU, which European states stand with Palestine? As Israel widens the scope of its invasion to the southern city of Rafah, 4 European countries might soon officially recognize the state of Palestine. What effect will the legal move have on ceasefire negotiations? Hello and welcome. I'm Giada Santana, and this is Today in the EU. Mounting pressure from civil society, along with the gravity of the humanitarian situation in Gaza, have pushed Spain, Ireland, Malta, and Slovenia to commit to legally recognizing the state of Palestine by the end of the month. I'm joined in the studio by Alexandra Brzozowski, Euractiv's Global Europe editor, to discuss the scenarios ahead and the future of EU and Israel relationships. Hi, Alexandra.
Hi, good morning.
There were rumors that Spain and Ireland, along other member states, were likely to recognize Palestinian statehood this Tuesday, 21st of May. Will we see this step happen in the end?
Indeed, there has been some back and forth in the past week over this issue. Spain's Prime Minister Sanchez has been spearheading this push actually since earlier this year already, so it would be the 10th country that would recognize the Palestinian state. Ireland, Malta, and Slovenia are also expected to follow suit, and they together have been actually making those steps in that direction already. They signed a declaration in March supporting the recognition of Palestine as a state, and for them it was also to make sure that this is a way to move towards a solution of the conflict as a two-state solution.
You mentioned a few. Are there any other countries that you foresee joining along the recognition ceremony?
A number of countries, actually including Belgium and Portugal, have said that they would be interested to join the recognition, also in an attempt to give it more weight. However, it's a bit more ambiguous on this side because, for example, for Belgium, who holds the EU presidency, and for Portugal, who just held national elections, it's a bit more tricky to make that step in the direction already now. Norway, for example, which is not an EU member state, but a close EU partner, has expressed interest to join. However, Sanchez confirmed on Friday that Spain's recognition might not be made on Tuesday's Council of Ministers, as he had suggested before. It could come maybe on Wednesday, so it remains unclear whether we will actually have an announcement today or it will be rather an outline in the next few days. Sanchez also told Spanish media last Friday that he would need to confirm the final details over the weekend with European partners and with this coalition partner, because the recognition of Palestinian statehood was a condition of the coalition pact between PSOE and the progressive platform Sumar. So there was a lot of moving elements over the weekend, and I think we will have to see in what form this announcement will be made.
We are saying in a very clear manner that we're ready to recognize the state of Palestine as soon as possible.
Pedro Sanchez has time and time again made it clear how Spain is ready to recognize Palestine. Why does Spain support the recognition of Palestine as a sovereign state?
So for Spain, it has been historically close to the Arab world, and Madrid has been actively pushing a line for a more favorable Palestinian aspiration within the EU. This goes already before the Gaza war started on 7th of October last year. So, and again, it is by far not only Spain. European leaders and officials over the past months have said that they could support a two-state solution in the Middle East, especially because the frustration is growing with Israel's military actions in Gaza. So we had French President Macron saying last month that it's not a taboo for France to recognize Palestine as a state. British Foreign Minister Cameron said the UK could officially recognize after a ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas war. So there's a lot of voices coming that could be moving in that direction. And in some way, the recognition of a Palestinian state is increasingly viewed as a political tool to pressure Israel into possibly accepting a two-state solution despite the government's resistance to that idea. So those in favor also argue that it would be good for Israel's own safety to move both things in parallel.
How many European members have recognized the Palestinian statehood so far?
Let's not forget 9 member states already recognize Palestine as a state. It's Bulgaria, Cyprus, Czech Republic, Hungary, Malta, Poland, Romania, Slovakia, Sweden, and to be honest, some of them are currently staunch Israel supporters. So there is a bit of ambiguity also on this side.
Right. Since the beginning of the Gaza war on October 7th, the approach that the EU has had towards the conflict raised quite a lot of criticism. As you rightfully said, it is increasing. Do you think the sentiment has changed, and in what way?
So the short-term impact of this recognition remains rather unclear, especially because it does not really solve the humanitarian situation on the ground and it does not stop the fighting. But when it comes to the recognition in the long term, it could increase the pressure on the European Commission to review some of the current ties with Israel. We can think, for example, about the association agreement over human rights violation concerns. This was a request especially made by Ireland and Spain in February. So what we could also see is that this will be used as a bargaining chip to increase the pressure on the EU side to act a bit more decisively when it comes to condemning Israel. It could also be used as a negotiation tool in further peace talks between Israeli, Arab, US, and Europeans. But this is a bit more long term than what we can expect. The discussion around Palestinian statehood and which countries will recognize it is only a side discussion, and to be fair, hugely symbolic, but will not change the overall trajectory of what EU policy is on this. Instead, the EU has become more serious in wanting to play a role in talks for the two-state solution. So we remember the EU's peace plan to end Israel-Palestine conflict presented in January. So far, and that goes for all the plans presented, be it the EU plans, the Arab plans, or the US plans. The precondition would be a ceasefire, which we seem to be very far away. So in some way, with the recognition, there has now also been a lot of criticism about fragmentation on EU foreign policy. For some EU diplomats, the announcement had come out of the blue, and some have even said it was rather counterproductive in the current discussion about trying to get the humanitarian situation right.
Right. At the time we're talking, around 35,000 people have been killed in Palestinian territories, and there is more and more pressure on state actors to speed up the peace process. I'm sure it's really hard to make any rightful predictions at this point, but do you expect this to at least fasten the pace of negotiations?
What we see at the moment is that the ceasefire negotiations are not very much moving forward. It's also not very clear where the European involvement is there at the moment. We have the peace plan that the EU presented earlier this year in January, but realistically, it's the Americans and the Arabs that have to steer the peace negotiations. We saw that some of those rounds failed. They had talks in Cairo, I think, over the past few weeks, but in the end, this is the most immediate concern. Like, I think when we speak about the recognition of Palestine, it's a good political goal to have. But in the end, the most urgent thing is to get humanitarian aid into Gaza. And there we see that there's a lot of backlash over the past few weeks. The openings at the land border are not being opened by Israel. We have also the problem with a potential invasion of Rafah. So there's a lot of moving pieces on the ground, which obviously should take more precedent, and that's something that also we hear increasingly from European officials, that this needs to move first.
This is You are shredding the UN Charter.
In a video that went viral, the Israel ambassador to the UN shredded the UN Charter after the General Assembly voted in favor of Palestine becoming a UN member. The United States has also been against any further recognition of Palestine. Are these European states putting themselves in a tricky position with Washington and Tel Aviv?
So the vote at the General Assembly last week showed an overwhelming backing for recognition. It's currently 50 out of 193 UN members that do not recognize a Palestinian state. So for Palestine, this recognition, even if it's done by smaller EU member states, is important in increasing pressure at the UN level. But let's not forget that state membership can only be decided by the UN Security Council. So the prospects are rather small. And there, if we remember who's sitting on the UN Security Council, I think we have also to be realistic about where the Europeans are. in this.
Can you elaborate on that? Who is sitting at the UN Security Council, and what does that say about the amount of influence that European states have?
The UN Security Council is composed of 15 members, 5 permanent members, China, France, Russia, United Kingdom, and the US, and 10 non-permanent members, which are elected every 2 years. But in that, France is really the only EU member state, so the impact we can have is rather small.
And Palestine is not the only candidate up for statehood recognition. Could the European move set a precedent for Kosovo or Taiwan?
Those cases are actually very different from each other, and each with its own limitations and political agreements. So I wouldn't necessarily compare them. I think specifically for Kosovo, we have a process going on, the Belgrade-Pristina process, where recognition is part of it. So there's different stages and different legal settings for those. And comparing it with Palestine, I think would be very, very difficult.
Thank you, Alex. I'm Giada Santana, and this was Euractiv's Today in the EU podcast. Visit Euractiv to stay on top of the latest news, sign up for our podcast newsletter, and if you haven't subscribed yet, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or whatever it is that you get your podcasts. Leave us a star review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite streaming platform. It will really help us spread the word about our work. This episode was produced by Nicoletta Yonta and me. As part of our commitment to accuracy, inclusion, and transparency, Euractiv is part of the Trust Project.